Hey everybody, once again we are going to take another trip around the world, and we are going to start here with my pond. We got a few things to talk about in the pond this week. Just some basic maintenance I need to get taken care of. One is cutting back this bract. I just usually refer to it as a flower, but technically it is not. It is a bract, but it is well past its prime. It's all browned up and done, ready to go. Will not be too long before this one is right behind it, and we'll be cutting that one out of there and getting that trimmed out. The other thing that is worth noting in here, it's a little difficult to see, but if you look right in the center, you can see this planter that once upon a time had a water lily in it, and it was from my pond last year out in the yard. I brought it in. I thought I would overwinter it in here, and it just faded away and never really did anything. And I was getting ready to throw it away because I just thought it had died off by lack of light. And someone told me not to because they need a dormant period and it will probably come back. And if you look, you can see it's come back. I've got little green shoots coming out of there. We got some leaves beginning to appear, so pretty soon, hopefully, we will have two pond lilies going. This is just going to be a standard water lily, and even though a lotus really is just a water lily, it's just a fancy name for a water lily. My red tiger lotus here is also looking really lush and nice, and hopefully that will start sending some new shoots up to the surface as well. The last thing I want to say about the pond is that I've come up with sort of a new way of doing my filter. For my regular viewers, you know I've got a sort of container in here. It's round, and I was making like sort of a cinnamon roll out of my batting, and I was just sort of sliding the roll into the container. And then recently I switched over. I started cutting it into squares, and I would lay sort of a stack of the squares. I would just sort of set them in there, and that's working really well as far as the filtration. But it occurred to me the other day that it was a really sort of wasteful bit of time to sit there and chop up all of these bits and pieces and lay them over top of each other. So what I'm going to start doing from now on is just take my sheet of the batting, and instead of cutting little squares out of it, just roll it and fold it over on itself a bunch of times, and then boom, stick it in there, and there's my filter pad. So no more chopping and cutting and all that kind of stuff. I'll just roll up a little wad of this, stick it inside my filter housing, and we'll be good to go. The outlet for that filter is actually all the way, you see that white rock right there, that's holding it down, so the jet actually flows this way, and kind of the idea is to push water down towards this end where the filter intake will pick it up. We will be doing some video about this light here pretty soon. We're going to be talking about that. Eventually this tank is going to get lit, but not with this light. We will be lighting it with a different light, but we're going to talk about why we're not using this light. We got into it a little bit in my live stream last night, and we're going to get into that a little more probably this coming Friday on my live stream. So make sure you're subscribed and you don't miss my live streams. I do one every Friday night and Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Those are available for the public. And if you'd like a private and members only live stream, you can join memberships for $2.99 a month, and that'll get you access not only to the Wednesday night members live stream, but you'll also get access to my Discord server, where we've got a big active community going on over there, and you'll get to participate in that as well. So $2.99 a month is a good bargain for all you get with your extras with your membership. So let's move on from the pond. We're going to go ahead and turn that light out, just so it doesn't glare up the rest of the tanks too badly. Move my tripod out of the way for my live streams. Once again, my 29 just ticking over like a clock. Not a lot going on in here to talk about. I'm probably going to have to get in here at some point in the fairly near future and at least trim some of this Java fern back. It's getting a little bit bushy here in the corner, just to open it up, allow for a little more circulation. You can see my angelfish right there. You can see how washed out and pale its colors are. I literally just turned the lights on about 5 minutes before we got started on this video. So you're seeing my early morning tanks today. Probably ought to get in there and do a little work. But you can see I replaced the filter recently, and it is not yet backflowing, so we have not yet clogged the filter up. That's a rare sight on this tank. This one almost always has that filter backflowing in the middle, but it does not today. It does need a top off, however, and that is about it. So again, my 29 just ticks over like a clock. I never really have to do much in here. I never do much in the way of maintenance or anything else. The occasional water change about twice a year. I wipe the front glass down, and about once every 2 years I get in there and trim the plants up. It's a very, very slow growing tank. I don't have a ton of light on it. In fact, this is probably my least well lit tank, and it shows in the rate that the flowers and the plants and everything in there grow. Well, I guess there's no flowers in there, but you get the idea. Alright, moving on. My 55-gallon Gourami tank. This tank is actually looking pretty good at the moment, relatively speaking. This is my tank that I'm just plagued with the cyanobacteria. I don't know why. It just will not get out of this tank. Over the years and years and years I've messed with it. I long ago gave up trying to eradicate it, and now I just try to keep it within reason. And again, I don't mind the way it looks in the tank. It's just sometimes it starts to get a little overwhelming, and you got to kind of beat it back into a more acceptable level of cyanobacteria. And that's exactly what I did. The other night we got in there, we did a big water change. I used my siphon, not the gravelback, but the standard siphon hose, and I went through and I sucked up as much of the physical cyanobacteria as I could. You can see these big open patches on the rock. I got a lot of cyanobacteria off of that. I got a lot of cyanobacteria off of this wood, and I removed a bunch of the excess Java moss. So it looks like the woodwork in there has had a pretty serious haircut. You can actually see the woodwork down here. That whole big thing is a big piece of wood and has the Java moss attached to it and growing all over it. And then we have the Java Windelov, and this had a ton of cyanobacteria growing all through it. I got as much of it out as I could, but we then treated it with ChemiClean, and you can see the difference. You can see the nice green algae, and then you see all the dead cyanobacteria, all that dead cyanobacteria on the back wall. You can see over here on this side how brown it looks instead of being that nice bright green or even that reddish color. Although I will say on camera this tank comes out looking a lot more purple than it does to the eye. This back here, for example, looks just absolutely as brown can be to my eyes, but in my camera monitor here it actually has a little bit of a purplish tinge to it. So there could be still some of the red cyanobacteria growing in there that I'm just not seeing very well. The camera might be picking it up a little better than I'm seeing it. I don't know. But this is the tank I've done the most work to recently, and it is the tank that looks most improved recently. And of course we got to clean the glass down every other day in this tank with all the bright lighting. This is one of my tanks that I have very well lit. I have four. I have 6 of the floodlights over my larger tanks. My 6-foot tanks have the 6 lights hanging over them, and this 55 here only has 4 of them. But that is 4 floodlights. You know, these are meant to light up your driveway or light up your backyard at night, so they definitely put a lot of light down into that water and onto that front glass, and that's why we have so much issues with algal growth and the cyanobacteria. That all contributes to it. So I like it brightly lit, and that's just the price you pay. If you want to have really, really intense bright lighting in your tank, you're going to have to deal with stuff like algae and cyanobacteria. And of course I also have to deal with getting in there and trimming my plants up all the time on a regular basis because they grow like wildfire in there. So moving on to my 55-gallon tank. This is one that we have also recently done a ChemiClean treatment on it. And you can see here how some of these clumps of cyanobacteria are falling off the glass. They're just sort of dying and breaking loose. We do have some nice bright green algae growing in there, but again, I'm not really worried about the algae at all. It's just when the cyanobacteria starts to become a little overwhelming, I like to get in there and trim that up a bit. So my Singleton Discus is still doing really well in this tank. Remember, this Discus was being bullied in my Discus Tank. It's definitely the bottom of the pecking order. I lost one due to bullying, and before I really realized what was going on, I lost that first one. And immediately after the first one was killed off, the pack went after the next weakest one, I guess, and that was this one. And at that point, I realized what was going on. It was not an illness or any kind of parasites or anything like that. It was just plain old stress from being bullied. And so I was able to get this fish out in time, and I separated it. I put it in this 55, and it's been living singularly and quite happily ever since. Its colors are nice and bright. It eats well. It's growing just fine. It seems to be absolutely fit as a fiddle, being in this tank all by itself. So definitely saved its life by removing it from the situation it was in. Unfortunately, I did not catch it in time for the other one. Everybody kept telling me to treat it for this and treat it for that, and I need this kind of medication and that kind of medication, and it didn't need any medication. It needed to be separated from the tank because it was being bullied. And again, I just did not realize that until it was too late. Now that I'm looking in here and actually looking around, I noticed some white stuff on the front of this fish. I have no idea what that is. I can't tell whether it's growing on its face or it's swimming around with something in its mouth. I'm not sure what that white thing is on that, but we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on it. It almost looks like some kind of fungal growth or something. Very interesting. It's the first time seeing of that. And if you've noticed, I've got a diamond tetra in here whose swim bladder issues are getting worse. It has to spend a lot of its time just swimming around just to stay up in the water column. So I have seen fish like this live for quite a while, but it's definitely, you know, on the downside. It's definitely not going to live for too much longer, but we might get 6 or 8, 9 months out of it. You never know. It's been like this for quite a while already. It just seems to be getting less and less buoyant over time, and it has to swim harder and harder to stay up in the water column. Never had any luck with having a fish recover from this. They're old. Those diamond tetras, the 2 that are remaining in there, are the last 2 out of a school of 6 or 8 that I got years ago, and so it's just how things go. It's, you know, the fish start to have stuff go wrong with them, just like we all do as we get older, and eventually we just won't have those 2 diamond tetras in there anymore. So the one I am actually worried about, though, is this one. I don't know what that white stuff growing out of its face is. It's really sort of strange looking. I've never seen anything quite like that. It doesn't look fuzzy. It doesn't look like a fungal infection. It looks like solid white. It almost looks like somebody has put some white clay or something on its nose. I don't know what that is. But we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on it, and I may even try to get that out of there and put it into some kind of quarantine situation and see what's going on with that. So very interesting, but we're seeing that for the first time together. Alright, moving along. So this is the tank that we are eventually going to be changing the lighting in. It's interesting how clearly we can see in there from the bleed over light from this tank. Again, that's just light pollution. You see how much light we have just shining into the room that comes off of those floodlights. And apparently quite a lot of it is lighting this tank. So that's probably more than enough light for the plants in there to keep growing, but I'm kind of blacking out the algae. And as a result of not having this huge bright grow light over the tank, I'm actually getting on top of all of the grossness in here. For my regular viewers, you'll remember how just covered in the hair algae and cyanobacteria this tank was. Just an absolute mess, and I'd finally decided it was time to get in there and strip it out and redo it because it was just looking so terrible. Now it's actually not looking so bad again. If I can keep working on it, get it cleaned up a little more, I might be able to get in there and just do some minor adjustments, kind of make the tank a little more modern, and then we'll be good to go, and I won't have to really strip this whole tank out and redo it. So the lighting is definitely going to get redone. This again is an actual grow light. This is meant for growing fairly serious plants. That is 60 watts, and again with the light spectrum and the LEDs and everything that are on there, that is really designed for growing plants indoors. And again, it's kind of designed for growing fairly serious, light-hungry plants, and you're looking at a tank full of low-light plants. These plants do not need a ton of light, as we recently discovered by finding some Java Fern living in a bucket in my other room, for several years with the lid closed, and apparently it was still getting enough light to stay alive under those circumstances. So this, I probably give them enough light in 10 minutes to last them an entire year. So we're going to have to do something about that, and we will be. So probably, once again, as I said, Friday night's Friday night's public live stream, we will probably get in there and work on this tank. Maybe we'll talk about lighting and light spectrums and stuff like that. We got into it a little bit last night at the very end of my Sunday night live stream, but we still have plenty to talk about if we want to. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you check out my live streams, and you'll get all that. So moving right along, in fact, let's turn this light back out. And we're going to have a look here at my other 125 Darrell. So this is my New World tank, is what I've technically named it. It used to be a native tank, but then little by little more and more fish kept getting added to it, and because they're not natives, I stopped calling it my native tank. But a lot of the fish I put in there were native to North, South, or Central America, and hence we named the tank my New World tank. Those are all New World fish. I do have a couple of African fish in there, and I do have one Indonesian fish that has gotten in there over the years, but I'm not too worried about it. I don't need to change the name every 6 weeks whenever I add a new fish in it, so we still just call this my New World tank. Not a lot to look at, not a lot going on in there, but I do like to show the tank when it's doing its thing and it's not feeding time. As a rule, most of my viewers only see the tanks when I'm doing my live streams or I'm doing a video and I'm throwing food in there and everybody gets to see all the activity and the fish swimming around. But a lot of the times when I come in and just quietly stand in the room, this is the kind of tanks I get to look at. They're just chill, the fish are just hanging out, there's not a lot going on, no frenzy of fish swimming around looking for food. It's just a nice, relaxed, chilled out tank. And that's about all that we got going on in there. So moving right along, I have turned the light back on in my snail tank, and we'll see if I start getting the green water again. That's the reason I turned it off. But the reason I turned it back on was because I have a living filter in here. This is Java moss, and I just let that grow, and it just filters the water, and it filters the nitrates and all that kind of stuff, and it's just a nice, good little living filter in there. But it can only live for so long with no light turned on, closed underneath of that black hood like that. So I think I left it off long enough that we killed off the green water. I don't have all the algae in the water anymore like I used to, and now my living filter will be able to get plenty of light again. So snail tank is back up and on, and we can move along to my, I usually refer to this as my ham tank, and I only refer to it as such because these fancy goldfish all act like a bunch of hams whenever I point a camera at them. They're doing cartwheels and flips and rolling over and trying to get my attention because they want food, especially Blackie here, my big one with the giant brain sack. This one is just nuts when I come over here. Does all kind of headstands and cartwheels and all kinds of stuff. Absolutely love my fancy goldfish. Never thought I'd be a goldfish person, but I am apparently, and I love my fancies. So we did actually do some work on this tank recently. We had another one of those crazy lights over top of it, and we got rid of that crazy light and we put just a single floodlight hanging over it. Now remember, that is a Cree LED, so it is a good high quality chip, and the light it produces, even though it's just a outdoor floodlight, the light it produces has a color rendering index of 90 plus, meaning that it is over 90% similar to natural sunlight. So we got a very, very nice broad spectrum, very beautiful light shining on the tank, but because we've only got the single floodlight up there and it's kind of far away from the tank, we've actually got a much reduction in light in the tank. The result of that is you can actually see through the glass. Now you can see there is algae growing on the glass. There's a little bit of haze there, But my regular viewers know that it used to be that within 3 or 4 days there was so much algae growing on the glass that you literally could not see through it. It was just like an opaque green sheet of algae growing across that glass, and I got that within 3 or 4 days after I cleaned it out. I used to have to clean it with a razor blade rather than my melamine sponge pads. It was just a mess. And of course the inside of the tank was growing cyanobacteria like crazy. The algae was growing like crazy, which, you know, isn't a big deal when you got 4 goldfish in the tank. They are serious algae eaters. But it was also giving the goldfish an awful lot of food to eat, and they are growing like weeds. The 2 smaller ones are ones I purchased from PetSmart, and they were both, you know, little PetSmart size fish when I brought them home. And you can see how big and chunky they are now getting. There's some fat little buggers in there. So this one is Wednesday. This one is Melissa fish. This one is Blackie. And this one is Bruce Brown. And if you don't know who Bruce Brown is, you can look him up. He's a filmmaker from way back in the day. Made one of the greatest surf movies ever made, The Endless Summer. So that is Bruce Brown. I know it doesn't look like that's a movie producer, but it is. So moving along, we're going to check out my Discus Tank here. So this is the tank where all of the fish that I mentioned earlier had gotten bullied by this fairly large group of discus. I've got 10 of them in here. Well, I had 10 of them in here. The one got bullied and died, and the second one got bullied and removed. And so now I have 8 of them in here, along with some rainbow fish. I've got a Tenopoma, a Cutirostra, which is an African spotted leaf fish, depending on where you buy it. It's got a lot of different common names. He is hanging out right down here in the corner, sitting back there looking chunky and thick as a brick. Remember, when I got him, he was shorter than he is thick now. When I got that fish, it could have hid behind a postage stamp. He's probably over 9, but I don't think he's quite 10 years old yet. And I do say he because this one I do know is a male. If you look on the gill flaps, you can see right on the back trailing edge of the gill flaps, there's a little set of sort of spiky protuberances that stick out. It's like 4 or 5 little spiky bone looking things that stick out of the back of the gill flap there. That indicates that it is a male. So I do know that on this particular fish. As far as my lily pads go, we had one that popped up and then fell back down. I don't even know where that one went. Here it is. So this one didn't really open. It just kind of fell back into the water. I'm not really sure why. And this one is kind of trying to open, but it's a really small, and it looks like the top is stuck together here. There we go. Pop that top. There we go. Now it can open nicely. So we do have a small lotus flower going on in the discus tank here. Take a few moments to slap my pads. You always got to slap your pads when you get the chance. Never miss a good opportunity to slap your pads. And this tank also 6 of the floodlights. So I mean it when I say I really like these lights. They really produce a really high quality light. And when you've got fish like rainbow fish and you got these discus in here, you definitely want light that's going to make those colors really pop. And that one does it. I do have one piece of Java Fern in the other room. We talked about that a little while ago. I found it in a bucket. It's been there for years and years. And I also used to have a huge mass of Java Fern attached to this piece of wood here. I got a little carried away one night when I was doing some tank maintenance, and I wound up ripping that whole mass of Java out of there after years and years of it being attached to that piece of wood. So I thought a fitting tribute would be to replace that years-old piece of Java Fern with the years-old Java Fern that's been living in that bucket. And so that's another thing we're probably going to do this Friday night on my live stream. We're going to attach that Java Fern to this piece of wood using some cotton twine or some cotton thread. And that way, as it starts to root to the wood and the thread starts to rot away over time, it'll sort of work itself out by the time the thread is gone and dissolved and rotted away. Again, we're just going to use cotton twine, and those organics will definitely deteriorate away in the tank. It'll take quite some time to do it, but by the time it's done rotting away, the fern will have had time to attach to the piece of wood and everything will be going nicely. So as far as the tank temperature, I get asked that a lot. The upper number is the temperature. The 85 degree is my cutoff. That's where an alarm goes on for the tank getting too hot. Remember, I have other fish besides discus in here, so I don't want the tank over 85 degrees. But right now we're sitting at 80.1, and that is typically about the temperature I always keep this tank, right around 79 to 80 degrees, if you are wondering what temperature I keep my discus. So there you go. Moving on to my 20-gallon tank. This has my angelfish, Frank Gorshin. I generally don't name my fish, but I have a few that I name just for fun, or just because they are special fish. And this one I named Frank Gorshin. Some of my older viewers may get that, or if you are a big Trekkie. And interestingly enough, I am not a big Trekkie, but this one's named Frank Gorshin nonetheless. And again, if you're interested in figuring that out, it's not too hard to figure out why his name is Frank Gorshin. But I'm going to make you figure it out. I'm not going to tell you. If you want to know, you have to figure it out on your own. Not much going on in here. I just reduced the amount of water Sprite I had in here by a lot. This used to just cover this whole side of the tank, and now we can actually see in there again. I had a bunch of this Ludwigia that I just trimmed out. This is nice red. I believe it is Ludwigia repens. And I've also got some of this Anubias growing attached to the wood back there that's now getting some light again. So that, and then this is African water fern, and it's growing really well. I mean, it's going crazy well. I attached one little piece of it to this piece of wood right here, and I mean, you can see how much of it's in there. So that needs to get trimmed up. My only concern is I'm not really sure about the growth habits of it, and I don't want to get in there and damage it too much, and I certainly don't want to pull the entire mass off of that piece of wood. So I'll have to get in there and try to separate that out a little more gently, but that's on the agenda. We'll get to that one of these days. Moving on down to my quarantine tank, we've got my resident platy in there, my red wag platy. I used to have two red wag platies in there, but one of them died recently, so I'm now down to the single red wag platy. And I also have a couple of clown plecos in here, but clown plecos are not the most outgoing of fish, and so we don't really actually see any at the moment. But there are two clown plecos in here, and actually quite a lot of snails now that I'm looking at them. I might start using some of these to feed Butterbean. So another thing on the agenda for another one of my live streams coming up is we're going to get in here and get those clown plecos out, and we're going to put them in my 55-gallon tank. So moving on to Butterbean's tank, last but certainly not least is my formerly brackish tank that is no longer brackish. And I'm sure Butterbean's in there somewhere, although I do not see him. There he is. Just popped out to make an appearance. So we've done some work in here recently. I got a bunch of the crud out. We got a lot of the cyanobacteria that was just dying and hanging off the back wall out of here. We cleaned up that piece of wood. We got some of the dead Anubias out of there. Got some of the dead Java fern out of there, and just generally got the tank cleaned up nicely. We did do a couple of series of water changes while we were doing that. Obviously, I was getting in there with a siphon to get that stuff out. And as such, we did a couple of big water changes, and when I replaced the water, I did not add any marine salts. We just stayed straight with fresh water out of the tap. I've not tested this with my refractometer yet, but we were only at like 1.002. We were well under what is technically brackish water before my series of water changes, and since I didn't add any more salt back, we're definitely below brackish now. We're probably in just straight up fresh water. It's probably 1.000, and we probably have very few dissolved mineral salts in this tank at this point. So he looks better than he's looked in years, and so I'm going to stick with him being in fresh water for now. The fresh water should also help to kill off the red cyanobacteria that you can clearly see in this tank. The red cyanobacteria seems to thrive in salty water, and so now that I've removed the salt from this water, I'm hoping that red cyanobacteria will struggle and eventually die off. And I'm also hoping these plants will recover and start doing a little better, since they're no longer going to be in that salty water with the higher pH. So we will have to wait and see. Time will tell. So there you go, everybody. That is pretty much it. That's a look at Butterbean's tank, and that brings us all the way back around to where we started. Sort of, more or less. In fact, we can actually come all the way around to where we started, and we'll turn... excuse me. My goodness. Pardon me. Come all the way back around, turn the pond back on. I'm going to say thank you for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. Again, you don't want to miss any of the videos I've got coming up, and you definitely don't want to miss my Friday or Sunday night live stream. It's a good time. We hang out. I got a nice, good, tight community, a lot of regular viewers, and we all usually have a pretty good time on Friday nights and Sunday nights. And again, if you're interested, check out the memberships. For $2.99 a month, you get a third live stream that's for members only on Wednesday nights, plus you get access to my Discord server, which again is for the community, and you can post your videos and pictures and comment, and you can direct message me, and it's just a good place and a good community. So for $2.99 a month, you get all of that. Well worth it. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you join a membership, hit that like button, hit that bell, all that good YouTube stuff, and I will see you real soon on the next one.